Good evening, everyone. We're glad that you're joining us on this Christmas Eve. My name is Mark Kleisner. I'm blessed to be the lead pastor here at First United Methodist Church of Rhinelander. And again, it is our hope and prayer that this service, this time together, though virtually, will touch your heart in a very special way. Over the past 9 months, we have been experiencing almost nothing but bad news. Bad news as it relates to the pandemic. Bad news as it relates to our political discourse. Bad news that as a country and as a people, we have become very tribal. Instead of coming together and discussing our problems, we have been pointing to the other, often as the enemy. So much of the news that we have been experiencing from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News really hasn't been all that good, has it? Now there is some hope with the virus, and I think all of us should feel a sense of relief, knowing that a virus or a vaccine has been discovered for the COVID-19 virus, and that in time, all of us will be inoculated, and it's our prayer that through the vaccinations, that our pandemic will extinguish itself. But until then, the news still isn't good. Many more will get sick, and some will die. Our lives are still turned upside down. Even during this Christmas season, many of us will not be able to connect with family and friends. And tragically, there are some this holiday season, they're going to be looking at an empty chair. Yes, the news has not been very good. But there's hope. Yes, there's hope again with the virus, as it relates to our pandemic, with the vaccinations that are on the horizon. But I want to talk to you about some good news. Actually, some great news of joy. And it's found in our scriptures for this evening. It's found in the Hebrew scriptures through the prophet Isaiah and in the New Testament Gospel of Luke, as he shares with us the Christmas narrative. In both cases, God is giving to God's people good news in the midst of suffering. In the case of Isaiah, he was not only projecting out into the future with the coming of Jesus, he was also speaking to the people of Israel at that time, who were going through a difficult time. And he was reminding the people that God will never leave them. Now, in the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago, the people of Israel was under the yoke and the oppression of the Roman Empire. They had something they called the Pax Romana. That's the peace of Rome. They didn't like any dissent, and they ruled with an iron fist. People lived in fear. People were uncertain about tomorrow. People were longing for some good news. They were longing for a deliverer, someone who would free Israel from Rome's yoke. And there, 2,000 years ago, born in Bethlehem, was a baby. Born in the most humble of circumstance, in a manger. He was lying, and there the sounds of the animals were heard in the background, and the truth was the smell of manure was in the air. It was in that that stable, in those humble settings, that God was introducing good news to the world. That a baby was born that would deliver people from their sins, and that would bring peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Boy, if there's ever a time we need that good news, it is now. We need to hear the good news that we're going to get through this pandemic, that the wounds of this nation will heal. We need to have the good news that we can become reconnected with our family and with our friends. We long for that good news that our lives will return to normalcy, whatever that might look like now in the future. We long for good news. But we will never find that good news if we're constantly peering and watching all those cable news networks on our televisions or devices. Though it's important for us to be kept up to date about the circumstance of our world, we have to understand that we cannot find hope in that. We cannot always find hope in our political parties or their ideologies or their agendas. And sadly, many have put their faith and trust in ideologies and in people that in the end would only fail. You see, our trust, our faith, and our allegiance and our hope is fixed on Christ. For He is our Lord of Lords, our King of Kings. Knowing that His message gives us hope and deliverance is something that we need to shout out from the highest mountains as good news of joy. And why do we shout out? Because we want other people to know and to hear about what Christ has done and will do in our lives and in our circumstance. Now, the truth of the matter is that many of us are not exempt. None of us, in fact, are exempt from the pains and the hurts of this world. But the good news is that we do not have to be defined any longer by that bad news. That our hope and joy is fixated on the promise of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. We may not always get there, but it is a hope, it is a good news that we claim as our own. So how are you going to live out this good news as we enter a new year? How are you going to live out that good news as you reconnect with family and with friends? How are you going to reconnect with that good news when life returns again to normalcy? How are you going to live out that good news when you're sitting alone and you're reminding yourself what you need to do to make a difference not only in your life but in the lives of others? You see, the promise of Emmanuel is that God is with us. In the final chapter of Matthew, the final verses, Jesus reminded His disciples, and He reminds us this Christmas Eve, that, lo, I am with you, even to the end of the age. And that in of itself is good news of great joy. And my hope and prayer that you can embrace that joy in your heart and in your lives today. Merry Christmas, everyone, and God's richest blessings to each of you. Shalom.